Hello everyone, today we are going to create that Caribbean lonely island with some typical Caribbean water, some cliff rocks, some normal rocks, palms, grass, and a gradient from sand texture to grass texture. The approach is similar to my modular landscape, which I've already made a tutorial to. I will put a link in the, I think, upper right corner or in the description below. But this time we have some kind of isolated landscape and not like my other tutorial with a theoretically infinite landscape. And this time I used the proximity effector to create that random landscape. And if you want to know how to create this, just watch that video. So we will start with deleting our default cube. And we will create a plane. The plane will be later our beach and our island, and therefore we will make it a little bigger, maybe around 50 to 50 meters. Apply the scale. And now we subdivide it, maybe 10 times. No, that's not enough. We make it 2 times more, maybe something like that. Now go to top view. And select with the select circle tool something like that, maybe. It doesn't have to be perfect. The more unperfect, the more natural it will look later on. And now we will create our island with the how is it named? The proportional editing tool. The tool has to be adjusted. Mine is obviously much too big. Now you can see the circle in the right position. I think we can go with maybe something like that. The top plane will be our island, and the fall off, you can see, will be our beach going slowly into the water. Now we have the problem that some of the edges also raised up, and we have to pull them down again. So grab them and just push them a little bit down, something like that, and that, and the other side like this, and the last one something like this. So at the end we have something like that. I'm pretty sure it's possible to create that kind of thing, that plane within geometry nodes, but I think that would be too complicated, and it's not the focus of that tutorial, so I just created that manually. And later on you can edit it manually if you can see that the beach is still not long enough. So everything's fine. Now we will create our geometry nodes object out of that plane. Click on the plane and go into your geometry nodes tab. I have mine already open, and create a new geometry node setup. This time we can leave the group input and output connected, and the first thing we want to do is create some subdivision that we can control. So subdivision, something like that. Later on we can control the details of our island with that subdivide level control here. And now we need, of course, a Z position node to make the noise deformation. Z position, we will plug that here at the end. And now it's time for some noise displacement. Therefore we need, of course, a noise node. For some randomness we will need an RGB curves node. We will need a math node set to multiply. We will need a position node. We will need a combine X, Y, Z node. And last but not least, we will need a vector mass node. So now we plug in the FAC output into the color input. And of course you can play with the values you like best, but to get to the visual you saw at the beginning, I used these values: 0.01, detail about 10, roughness 0.3.5, and the distortion is about 5. So now plug in the RGB curves into the upper value, and therefore we multiply the distortion, and with that value here you can later on apply the height of your island mountains. Now plug in the output into the Z input, because we only want to distort the Z-axis of the island. And now comes the important part, our position node into the upper value and the combined X, Y, Z into the lower input. The position node will give us the position of every vertex you can see here, and you have to imagine that whole procedure as some kind of loop, and it loops until every single vertex point has run through that loop, and it gives us from every point the position and makes some distortion out of it. So back to object mode, and we can plug in the add mode right into the position node, and you can see something is happening. And if we now adjust a little bit the randomness of our RGB curves, maybe something like this, and a little bit there. And there we got some distortion, but we can see that the resolution is much too low, so we can subdivide it here. And as you can see, we already got some landscape going on. Now you can play with the values. The distortion is maybe a little bit too high, so that looks more like a natural landscape. Maybe there. And also to mention, with the FAC number, you can also control the height of your island. If I turn that to 3, you can see that will give us immediately some very big change and make some mountains and valleys on our island. So now, how do we get the island only in the middle of it distorted? And I use therefore a proximity object. Maybe we group that first to get some structure in it, and we will call that island. And now it's time for a proximity object. For the proximity object, I've used a sphere. Something like that. And we'll make that about 20 meters. Let's rename the plane into island and the sphere into proximity object. Now plug our proximity object, drag and drop it into our scene. And now we need a geometry proximity object. We will need a position object, a position node, sorry. And third one, we will need a vector math node. And we will plug the, first of all, we are going to set the that to relative and plug in the geometry into the target and position into the lower input and that position node into the upper input. That will measure the distance between each point of our sphere and each point of our landscape. So now how do we connect the proximity object with our landscape? I used a map range node for that. I'm pretty sure there are other ways to do that. And I've plugged the map range node between the multiply node and the combine XYZ node, like that. Be aware of that the output of the multiply is into the highest input of the map range, and the result goes into the Z channel. Now you can plug in the now we have to set this to distance because we want to measure the distance between all the points. Where is distance? I always have to find it there. Now plug in the distance into from max, from max. Now you can see something is already going on. It's distorting somehow, but still not enough. And first of all, we are going to set our sphere to wire so that we can see something. Back to our sphere. Very important, you deactivate clamp, and now you can see that our sphere is controlling the height of our map. The problem now is that the lower part of the sphere of the ball is already touching the landscape of the island, but the outer parts of our sphere are way far away from our landscape, and the distortion is way too big at the inner part of the sphere, and the outer part of the sphere didn't even touch the ground. So we can solve this by scaling our sphere in the z-axis, maybe something like that. Though the fall off between the inner point and the outer points is way less. Maybe we scale it, and when I set origin to geometry, and when we scale, when we drop it down now, you can see the landscape is deforming just where our geometry nodes, where our proximity object is placed. Now there's one little issue. When we go down with our object a little bit too far, the Z value of the island rises into the infinite. So we can go into edit mode, select everything and duplicate our deformed sphere maybe one more time. So now we have the possibility to get even lower with our proximity object, and we have a smooth mountain, and it's the island does not come in the set position of the island does not come over our spheres, so we have much more room to let our island grow. I hope my my German English was good enough to explain that. So now we have our effector. we can play a little bit around with the values, and from that point your island will look totally different from mine, because you have a different position of the proximity object. You have a slightly different size of your proximity object. What you can also do is you can rotate it a little bit. That will give some weight to one side of the proximity object, and you can create some mountains, something like that. Don't rotate it too much, otherwise the deforming will be too heavy and the mesh will be distorted. Maybe I set this to 6, this to 5. And now I think we got some island. Now I think it's time for the water level. We can group that, Control J, and we will rename it proximity object. Now it's time for some water. We will create the water with a grid plane. And we will have to set this to maybe 200 to 200 meters, so we can simulate some kind of horizon. And we need some resolution for it, because we want to make some slight waves. And we will need a set position node for the distortion. Connect the mesh to the geometry, and we will need a join geometry node. I will copy that out. No. Output, group output. Yes, there is it again. And the set position node we plug into our join geometry node, and there is our ocean. Now the ocean is, as you can see, that little part here up is our island, and the ocean is way too much down, because we deformed our island in the z-axis level. Now let us bring the ocean to a normal height, maybe something like that. And there we have our small little island. Yes, I think we can go with that. The distortion here is a little bit strange, but as I told you, you can play with the values here. So you maybe have a totally different island than I have right now. I think I go with that shape. Now back to our water. Now the water level has the right Z position, and we need some waves now. We're going to make the waves with the exact same method as we used it down here. So we will need a noise texture. This time we won't need an RGB curve, because we won't have that random noise. We want to have a natural wave noise. Therefore we'll need a math node with set to multiply. The multiply value will control the wave height. Now we need again a combine X, Y, Z node. We need some space here. We need again a position node. And again we will need a vector math node to bring together all the nodes. Plug in, we will start here at the end. The noise texture, we plug in the factor into the value, and as I told you, this will be the wave height. Maybe I will set it to 2. And now, of course, you can play with your own values. And again, to get that image that you saw at the beginning, I used these values. By the way, I use 4D because in the 4D mode we have that channel, the V channel, where you can animate the waves. The scale I set to 2, the detail up to 10, the roughness I can leave at 0.5, and the distortion maybe to 4. Now plug in the multiply into the Z channel, because again we only want to affect the Z axis, and again these two, and now everything into the position. And now we already got some waves. To see the waves a little bit better, we can add a set shade smooth node. And now we got some waves. It looks a little bit small, but you have to consider that the island is very small, and maybe a person would be something like that height. It always helps to create some real world measurements. So let me just control the size and no, I mean, sorry, 2 point, and so that would be the size of a normal human being. And you can see the waves have, I think, a pretty normal height. I think I can leave that standing there, because it's always good to have some real world measurements reference. So now it's time to get some material. By the way, the light comes from, no, there's my shader channel. The light comes from a sky texture object with a pretty big sun, so the shadows are not too sharp, and some sun elevation. And I controlled it again with a background node, but you don't have to use that. I think it's totally not necessary. And now it's time for some colors. Maybe we will start with our water. Create a set material node, set material, and plug it just behind the set position node of the water. Maybe it's now time to set the group for the water. Now I've already prepared some material. I think I named it Caribbean Ocean. Yes, there it is. Nothing fancy. Object, where is it? Just let me create an object to show my Caribbean Ocean. So there it is. It's a principled shader with some cool Caribbean base color. Transmission is set to 1, the full, and the IOR is 1.333, the IOR of water. Then I created some noise texture with some scale and detail and roughness and a bump, and put that into the normal node. And I also plugged in, to get some nice fall off of the water, I also created a principled volume and plugged that into the volume input of the material output. Gave that also some bluish color, set the density to 0.6 and the anisotropy, hope I pronounced that right, to full throttle 1. Now that's my ocean setup. Now it's time for some, maybe I will put that to bounce. No, you can see nothing there. Wire. I will leave it like that. Now it's time to the ground material. Therefore we go back to our island control and create a set material node. Plug that right at the end. Now we can select our island material. I think I named it island ground. Let's check if everything's alright. Yes, it's a sandy beach. Let's jump into the material and have a look at it. Where's my plane? There it is. Ground, island, ground. It's not too complicated. Again, a texture coordinate node with a mapping and two pictures, which I downloaded, I think, from Ambient CG, from some of these websites where you can get free materials, free textures. I added a bright contrast to the roughness channel, and I think that's all, and everything into, you can delete that into the output. I made the experience that too complicated materials causes problems with these generated mesh, so I changed my material to only sand. The material you saw in the intro and you can see in the asset you can download, there's a link below, is a little bit more complicated because there is grass at the height and there is a mixed shader, so only the sand will appear at the beach and the grass will appear at the lower parts, but I realized that it's very hard to reproduce, so it was not good for the tutorial. Maybe if you're interested in, you can download the whole scene for, I think, $2 or €2, I think it is, and there is the more complicated texture, but for the sake of the tutorial I will leave it only with grass, and we will create the grass not with a texture but with real assets from my already prepared assets right here. So now let's jump back into geometry nodes. Now we have set up our water, we have set up our proximity node, we have set up our island with materials, and the rest of the tutorial will be only getting the vegetation and the rocks to our island. Now, what we need is, first of all, we are going to drag and drop our assets into our scene. Of course, we will not go into every asset in detail because that would be too much. If you want to have exactly these assets as you saw them in the intro, you can maybe download the scene at Gumroad, or maybe you can use the Blender Kit add-on. As I mentioned maybe before, there you can use thousands of models for free. You only have to subscribe to them, but you don't have to pay anything. If you have a paid account, you have even access to more models and even better models, but you have also with a free account access to a ton of very, very good, cool models. I think there are vegetation models too. You can maybe use one of them or create your own. Now we will start with our grass. Just drag and drop the whole group into our scene. And to make the grass appear on the island, we need a distribute points on faces node, and we will connect, let me push it right here, and we will connect the very output of our island. That's our island. Very output of our island we will connect with our distribute the distribute point on face mesh. Now we need an instance on points node. Connect the points with points. Set activate separate children, reset children. Plug that into instance. Create another join geometry node. Plug the instance into the join geometry node, and I think we should see some grass already. There it is. Maybe the density is now too high. I will lower that immediately. So now you can see a lot of grass going on, and the scene is that heavy because the grass is also under the water surface. So maybe we will go with a density of 0.5 for the start, something like that. And as you can see, something is wrong with our nodes. I forgot the pick instance to activate that button. So now everything is in shape. So here's our grass. Of course, it's not rotated very well. We will change that now. And of course, we want to align it along the normals. Taking align Euler to vector node, plug the normal into the vector, and the align Euler to vector into the rotation. And we will fix that issue here later with a set smooth node or something like that, or subdivision. But first of all, we will take care of the grass. Now we want to rotate the grass. Make a random value node and plug the random value node into the rotation. Set it to 0 and the lower value, I think, to tau. That gives the maximum amount of rotation, and set the align to Euler vector to z, so everything is aligned along the z axis. Now we are under the surface. I think I will go back into the normal shading mode. Yes, something like that. And now it's time to create, to let the grass only grow above the water and not below the water. Therefore, we are going to create another map range node. First of all, we will need a position node. We will need a separate XYZ node. That's the same setup as you saw in my landscape tutorial. We need a math node. The math node we will set to less than, and we will need a map range node. Now plug in the position node into the separate XYZ, and because we want only the information of the of the Z level of our vegetation and our water, we only plug in the Z value into the threshold from less than, and in the upper value we have to plug in our water level. First of all, we create that water level manually with a value. Later on we will connect that with a real water level, and now the less than to clamp, and I forgot one, another math node, that is to subtract, and subtract into the value, and now that whole thing goes right into the selection. And as you can see now, our imaginatively water level erases all the grass below the water. Now the grass looks a little bit too unnatural because there is one hard line. To solve this, we can plug in a random node between the input there and the output there. Random value. And now we can control the scattering of the grass, the water level, and much more scattering, so it looks more natural. You can imagine that again as some kind of loop. The value level and the position level goes for every single instance and every single point of our grass and our island, and will give them give the grass a random value along our water line. So now it's time, or maybe you can do that. We can do that later. No, we do that now. We plug in the real water level. Where do we have it? I think we have to create it. Go to the water, create a new value. At the moment we have 5.8. Create a combine X, Y, Z node. Plug that to Z and that there. That will leave the water at exactly the same level, and now we can plug in the value of our water right into our minimum random value input. And we should now have exactly the same as we had before. It's a little bit too less scattered. Maybe we add some math node and add, so we have much more better control about our vegetation. Now let's add some randomness to the scale of our grass. Therefore we will create a scale instance node. I'm pretty sure there are different ways to create that, but I decided to do it that way, and I take again a random value node and plug that right into the scale. Now we have cool control about the minimum size and the maximum size of our grass. Turn the density a little bit down so it is faster for the tutorial. And now we have some cool grass. Now let's fix that the texturing issue here on the island. Maybe it helps if we get some subdivision surface. And let's try set shade smooth. And that helps. So maybe we don't need the subdivision. It helps a little bit. We can leave that there. We have better control. And now we have a beautiful island with vegetation on it. And now let's do the last part, because the rest will only be copy and paste. Let's rename it grass. And now we create the underwater rocks. Just copy and paste that whole node. And delete the grass input. And I've already prepared some cliff rocks. Copy and paste your own cliff rocks into the scene. Rename it to underwater rocks or whatever you want. Just plug that into instances. Connect the mesh with the output of your island. And of course, connect the scale instances with the joint geometry. And I think we have to connect that value here with our water level. And of course, activate separate children and reset children. And here we have our water rocks right above the water. We don't want them above the water, we want them below the water. Therefore, just rename the less than in greater than. Now we have much of rocks underwater and below the water. That's because we changed that value here for the grass. And if you lower that value, you will see how the rocks disappear from the island, and maybe we don't need a random value right there, or we will lower that. Something like that. There are the rocks appearing. From that view we have better control. Of course, you have to play with these values until you found something that fits to your cool island. And now the rest is doing the same. You can add some palms with copying the grass layer. You can add some rocks again, and so on and so on. You can add that whatever you want. And as you shape the value, everything will grow immediately. There's a cool shape. And I hope everything worked fine in the tutorial. If not, please write in the comments. I will try to help wherever I can. Something like that. And don't forget, if you want to have any assets, try out the Blender Kit add-on. I think the website is blenderkit.com. It's a normal add-on. You get a zip file, I think, which you only have to plug in to install into your preferences. And that's all. You have access to thousands of free models. Hope you enjoyed the very long tutorial and the island works.